What do you think can be done about securing renewables? These are important technical questions. I mean, if we can get to renewables, great, but at what price? And can we make them reliable? And what role do you think coal and nuclear should continue to play? A bunch of issues in there.
Sure. So electricity we have come to expect to be highly reliable. In this country, the standard is that the bulk electricity system should be down no more than a day in a decade. And we, of course, have seen all kinds of chaos ensues, for example, in California or Texas in this country, when electricity is not there. Renewables, wind and solar, are unfortunately, as you noted, intermittent. That means that they do not generate electricity when the sun doesn't shine or when the wind doesn't blow. And since we don't have yet economic or large-scale ways of storing electricity, you have to produce the electricity when it's needed. And if the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing, you need something to pick up the slack. And that's the base load. And as you say, coal and then natural gas, which can be turned on and off relatively rapidly. Coal doesn't like to be turned on and off, and so it's generating all the time. The problem is, of course, that the load on the grid varies a lot during the day. It's low at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then it's high at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody has got the air conditioner running on a hot day. And so if we're going to have a high fraction of wind and solar, as many people are advocating, you'd better have some kind of backup. That can either be big batteries, but the technology is not there yet to let us do that economically, or it could be gas that you turn on and off as you need it, but that emits carbon dioxide. And certainly coal, it would have to be sequestered coal, and then we'd catch the CO2 and pump it under the ground if you really want to avoid emissions. And then finally, of course, you can have nuclear, which is truly emissions free. So we need to think about the electricity grid as a system and not just say, oh, wind and solar have gotten so cheap, so let's just deploy those. And the cost of that reliability makes the cost of the system 5, 6 times more than you would think it is if you just had wind and solar.
So that's the really key number. It's getting the system, the grid, if you like, to that point. That's where the massive expense comes in, because we hear this line all the time, oh, renewables are now cheaper. And if that's the case, why is it that the higher the dependence on or the uptake of renewables in any state or country around the world you look at, the higher the price of electricity? And you've just explained the reason.
You got to pay for the backup. For every megawatt of renewables that you put in, you got to put in at least a megawatt of backup.
So I think this is a real problem. Scientists and engineers understand the absolute physical limitations of energy system restructuring, but politicians, activists, and the media do not.
No, not at all. You have a sense in this country, and I expect it's true in Australia as well, that the people who are setting these goals and making these plans have no understanding of the realities of the technology or the economics or the operations of energy systems, whether it's electricity or it's the automotive sector.
Just as a little segue on batteries, you may have some thoughts here. Firstly, do you think the technology will get to the point where they're able to provide us with the backup? And secondly, what will be the environmental costs of building massive batteries, in as much as we understand the technology and the production capabilities at the moment? I really do worry about some of the materials that go into batteries, some of the, frankly, emissions that must be involved in gathering them around the place. I remember, I don't know whether it was apocryphal or not, but somebody once told me that the truth of the matter was that a Toyota Prius probably used more energy over its whole lifespan than the Land Rover, Range Rover sitting beside it in an upmarket suburban city. Here's an interesting little rub for you. In Australia's wealthiest suburb at one stage, it had the highest sales of Priuses and the highest sales of Range Rovers in the country. So You drove one when you wanted to make to be cynical, and you drove the other when you wanted to look something else.
Right. And you know that the electric vehicles, whether it's plug-in hybrids or pure battery vehicles, with the Australian grid being as carbon intensive as it is, you're not really cutting emissions. You're probably increasing them because of the manufacturing emissions, as you note. I think the vehicles, light-duty vehicles, cars, small trucks, will eventually be electrified. The electricity system storage, energy storage, I just helped run a US-UK workshop on that back in March. We've got a long way to go on the batteries before they can be economical and scalable enough to provide the kind of storage that we need for the grid.
I've seen serious policymakers, some of the most intelligent people in the country here, point to these limitations and immediately just find themselves banned in the public arena as climate change deniers.
It's like we're in the new dark ages, you know? We really, these are serious issues. They merit thoughtful responses, but the public and some of the politicians just don't want to do that. And I really wonder whether we are going to, and I'll use the word, it's pretty extreme, we're going to wreck the countries if we proceed at the pace and scale that's being proposed.
I'll tease that out in a moment. I'm very interested in exploring your thinking on that. But on this question, though, of how we cope, firstly, when you talk about adjusting, you know, there's some very serious global thinkers who say you've got to do your benefit cost ratios carefully, but the ideas of adaptation, and I come from a farming background, we've adopted to drought. Australian agricultural productivity has continued to rise despite the drought. There's a powerful message in that, but you're not allowed to talk about it. It's unpopular. And why is it that adaptation, as you describe it, has become verboten in this context? And how should we really understand it? Because I actually don't think we're going to be able to avoid adaptation. As a farmer, I'd say I'm already doing it.
Right, I would agree. You know, if you look at what would be required to even stabilize human influences, global emissions need to go to zero by the latter part of this century. And you look at the demographics and development, and that's just not going to happen. All right. And so I think it's futile to rely on that. And so the world will adapt. And adaptation has a number of advantages. First of all, it's agnostic. It doesn't matter whether the climate's changing naturally or because of human influences, we still adapt. The second is it's proportional. If the climate changes a lot, we'll adapt a lot. If it's a little bit, we'll adapt a little bit. The third is it's local. And so it's much easier to sell adaptation actions than it is to sell mitigation actions. You're not talking about problems 2 generations away and halfway around the world. It's here and now. And finally, adaptation is autonomous. We do it anyway, and it's effective. And maybe that's why people don't like talking about it.
I've never seen anything like the pile-on over net zero emissions. The Australian Prime Minister, I believe, actually has the right position. I admire him for it. He says it's a wonderful aspiration, but I want a technology roadmap to show us how we're going to get there. One of our eminent former chief scientists has been involved in a Princeton University exercise in America showing you what it looks like if America goes to net zero by 2050. I mean, you can do it, but the cost and the physical implications, you know, you've got wind farms for miles out to sea. It's just extraordinary. What are your views about this whole question of this sort of lemming-like insistence that somehow you're draconian and backward thinking and almost imbecilic if you don't support net zero now? And here's the irony. We've got businessmen and women in particular piling on and they're saying, well, we just won't invest in you unless you commit to net zero. Where are the engineers, the scientists, the business planners who say, well, actually, show us how you're going to get there?
So I'm allowed to say this because I used to be, and I still am, after a hiatus, an academic, okay, a professor. And if you'll excuse me, those roadmaps, such as the Princeton one, are put together by a bunch of academics, all right, whose main goal is to simply drive emissions to zero.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you value vital conversations like this one, please like, share, subscribe, and join the conversation.